Welcome to Heart on the Table, a tarot-inspired podcast for mothers, healers, and humans in the messy middle of becoming.
Two therapists, two moms, one card at a time.
Every week, we pull a tarot or oracle card
and explore its symbolism through the lenses of trauma healing, attachment theory, motherhood, and intuitive wisdom.
Together, we weave our clinical therapy knowledge
with personal connections to motherhood, spirituality, magic, and womanhood.
Reflecting on what it means to mother yourself and others
across timelines, triggers, and transformations.
I'm Bree Levitt, licensed clinical social worker.
And I'm Miranda Peterson, licensed clinical social worker.
It's part sacred space,
part cozy couch chat.
Expect laughter, insight, and a whole lot of heart. Welcome back to Heart on the Table. Today we are going to be talking about the Strength card, and we are excited to be talking about this card today. I'm excited. Oh, before we dive in, I just wanted to talk about the Instagram polls that I posted this morning because I asked a few questions just about strength, and we did have a good amount of responses this morning, which thank you all, because I posted those very last minute before recording today. So the first question I asked was, when you first hear the word strength, do you picture inner resilience or outward toughness? 73% said inner resilience and 27% said outward toughness. When you think of change, does change happen by brute force? 0%. Self-compassion? 40%. And 60% of you said both. Have you heard of the initiation threshold? But I knew when I typed that wasn't quite the word that I was looking for. 20% said yes, 70% said no, and 10% said, I don't know. I love that. And then I said, which feels true to you these days? 9% of you said strength built fast, and 91% said strength built slowly over time. Just back to that initiatory threshold. I'm excited to talk a little bit about that today. So we'll just dive into our analysis of what we see in the cards. You want to start there?
Sure. Yes. So this is card number 8. I notice just the forefront of the image. Like, it's a maiden. She looks to be petting or taming this lion. The lion is red, which stands out just because I don't know that I've seen a red lion. She also has an infinity sign above her head, which I know we've seen a couple of times. I think the magician had one.
And that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. She's wearing a white dress or gown, which probably has some significance to it. The background is pretty yellow, which I think is common for a lot of cards we've talked about, the background being yellow and what that symbolizes. I noticed there's no running water, which I feel like has been a common theme across most of the cards we've looked at, with the exception of a few, since this is only card number 8. But there are
only card number 8? I feel like we've been recording. I can't believe we're only on card number 8.
I know. This is probably episode, 12?
I think so, yeah.
13?
13, it will be 13.
Feels like we've been doing this for a lot longer.
It does.
There's a mountain, one strong peak, and green landscape, but that's about it. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about my own interpretation of the maiden and the lion. But what do you notice?
The one thing that I noticed that you did not mention is the lion's tongue is out. It's almost as if the lion is giving her a kiss, like a dog kiss, licking her. And I noticed that she has a lot of florals wrapped around her. This card reminds me a lot of the magician. Just almost a different take on it. But she's got a white robe. I think he was in a white robe. The infinity sign. Yeah, I think I don't notice much different than you already brought to our attention, other than it looks like the lion is giving her a kiss and the florals that she's wrapped in. You want to start?
Yes. So I think I wanted to just really highlight again, from past cards, we know that red means passion or life or blood, and white means clarity. And so I think that's interesting, the pairing of the two. They're definitely separate. I think the magician was wearing white underneath red, or red.
You're
underneath
right. White underneath red, I think.
But here they're very much separated. And I think that is it speaks to just the way that the two interact with each other. I have written here in my notes that the inner lion, again, these cards are all representation of us, like of our own inner landscape or of our own inner world. We all have these qualities within us, or the potential for them at least. And the inner lion in each of us is very instinctual and passionate. There's the word passionate for red. And very protective. And the inner maiden is very conscious and compassionate, and the presence that tames through understanding is the line that I have here. And I think that speaks to just the nature of this card as it being the strength card. It being two things, strength with compassion, which I think is another theme that we've talked about before. Strength through fear versus strength through compassion.
Yeah.
And how different the two are. And this card is definitely strength through compassion. I think that maybe that's what the infinity sign has to do above her head, just the endless possibilities that could come from compassionate strength.
Yeah.
But those are the two interpretations.
And Miranda's very prepared here with her notebook.
I wrote this a couple of weeks ago.
I love it. I'm just like, Miranda looks very prepared. And I'm just like, got my phone and card in front of me, which I love.
This is all thanks to you anyways.
I know.
You got me started on the journals and the...
Which shows you how my relationship to journaling and notebooking and preparation is a revolving door.
Yeah, you don't have to be good at it all the time.
I just thought it was cute that she's got her notebook.
This is new for me.
So it's like
yes. My newest obsession.
The novelty hasn't worn off yet.
No, not yet.
The things that I recall just in like some of my light research this morning, the biggest thing for me is I'm just thinking about like the way that she is petting the lion or I'm thinking of my own dog, so I'm just like giving the lion pet. Something that I was reading this morning is just viewing the lion as a part of ourselves that we have to, like you were saying, like when you think of a lion, you think of something maybe to be, I don't know, something powerful. On another hand, I was thinking of something to be feared, right? Like if you just ran into a lion in the wild, like I'd be a little, oh shit. But in this image on the card, like it is clear that she doesn't fear the lion. She is like befriending the lion. And I think like with our own healing journey, there comes this point where like we do have to acknowledge the parts of us that maybe we have feared, right? Or the parts of ourselves that like maybe we really didn't want to acknowledge that were there, or the parts of ourselves that are very wild. And at some point we have to acknowledge them and make peace with those parts of ourselves in order to feel strong.
I love that. It almost brings up a theme or like an underlying theme of surrender or trusting the surrender. Mm-hmm. When I think of a lion, the only time I've ever seen a lion has been at the zoo of some kind. I've never seen one out in the wild. And when you go to see one, I have my own opinion about zoos, but they're in cages and that's not how they're meant to be.
They're in cages, and every time I've seen them at the zoo, there's one in particular at the Hogle Zoo that is very agitated.
The whole, I think, maybe psychology behind that is interesting.
Yeah.
There's obviously, it's reality for a lot of these animals, which, again, is a different side of the story. And I also think maybe it's intuitively like our own relationship with our wild self.
Yes. Like, I'm thinking of the one lion that I see. I feel like it's like a particular kind of lion. I can't remember if it's with the lions or if it's something else, but it's similar. And every time I've ever been to the zoo, like pacing, like it's just pacing. And I'm thinking about the parts of ourselves that we keep in cages and how those parts become agitated. Like they're agitated and they are begging to be acknowledged and begging to be free. And the more that we fight against that, like the more agitated that they become. I'm thinking of internal family systems, which is like a popular therapeutic modality. And I'm just thinking about the lion very much being the parts of ourselves that we really want to not acknowledge or we want to ignore because maybe society frames them as like bad, or like we feel, or maybe we felt or been shamed into not feeling those parts of ourselves. But until we can acknowledge them and embrace them, they drive us. like those wild parts of ourselves. Like maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's grief, maybe it's despair, depression, loneliness. Until we really acknowledge those parts and sit with those parts and figure out how to understand where they were even born from or why they're there. If we can't give them compassion and understanding, they will continue to just take over and have that drive over us. I'm thinking about, like, I said we needed to talk about how do we give those parts of ourselves compassion?
Yeah. Again, this is an ongoing journey for everyone. Like,
Absolutely.
Even if you come across a way that works for you, it might not work in 10, 15 years. But
This is a revolving door.
yes,
Like my relationship to notebooking and journaling. Yeah.
It's a cycle, like everything.
I know.
But as far as like how, I think that really just begins with presence. And I think it means showing up and holding like a container or a space for this part of ourselves to come forward. Because how often we're spending all of our time shoving it away or burying it and making sure that it doesn't come out, right? That it doesn't get out of its cage.
Yeah.
And that it stays where we want it. And that, again, only makes it angry. I'm thinking very visually of something I saw several years ago. I thought that I saved it, screenshotted it. I've looked for it many times. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe it was a dream. I'm pretty sure I saw it. But it was like a swipe, like a carousel of images that you would swipe through. And the first image, I think it fits really well in this conversation, but it was an image of a person. I don't know how old they were. I guess it depends on how old you are at any given time of this person. And they're facing like this huge, like overshadowing monster. Like it's a shadow of some kind and it's all black and it's scary and it looks very monstrous. It almost felt childish to me in a way. This individual, I think they weren't a child. Yeah. The image of this other individual wasn't a child. It was older than a child. But anyways, there was this big shadowy monster. And as you scrolled through the images, the individual sort of like embraces, like hugs this shadowy image. And as you continue to swipe, the shadow shrinks and it turns into a fire. It gets a little less scary. Yeah. And then it turns into a child. And it's them as a child that has become like this big, scary thing because they've not taken the time to sit with it.
And acknowledge it.
So I think how we can begin to integrate these parts of ourselves that we want to keep buried away is to really intentionally create space for them.
Yeah. To add on to what you're saying about the big shadowy monster eventually with enough compassion turns back into the child through so many like therapeutic modalities, time in therapy, like whatever you want to call it, right? I think a lot of trauma modalities all get at the same thing where it's like we need to acknowledge the parts of us that were born out of the scary parts of our childhood. They're the parts where like we maybe didn't get what we needed, or I often use the term like the things that should have happened that didn't. Those things are also trauma, and those things can also turn into a big shadowy monster. And until you said presence, right? Like how do we give ourselves more compassion? I think I've heard something before talk about how depression pulls us backwards and anxiety pulls us forwards. And I think a lot of the parts of ourselves, like the part that feels lonely or the part that feels scared or grief, like whatever it may be, could also be categorically like in depression or in anxiety. Depression pulling us backwards and anxiety pulling us forwards. But I think something about presence is like it just begs us to be in the here and now. And being in the here and now allows us to, slow down with ourselves, right? And just appreciate like what is just in front of us in this moment. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast because I think it feels like something that's so simple. Like when you say it out loud, like just be in the present. Like we just need to be in the present. But it's seriously something that is just an ongoing practice forever.
And I think part of that too is being in the present can feel really uncomfortable.
Especially if there's so many unintegrated parts of ourselves or like trying to get our attention.
Yeah. I think that's probably the hardest part about it.
Yeah. Yep. When we are so fragmented or when we are so unintegrated. And like I'm thinking of a lot of compassionate practices. Like there's like compassionate touch where we just like hold a hand, hold your hands, or hold like a hand to the heart. But I'm thinking of Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, too, where she talks about, I think one of her very beginner practices of self-compassion is truly just sitting with yourself and acknowledging your emotion. Like I notice that I'm feeling sad and noticing other people feel this way too. It's like something about noticing we're not alone in our emotion. Like other people, there's so many people in this world, absolutely other people have felt the way that we feel. And then just like offering yourself some words of compassion. I'm going to get through this, or it's okay to feel this way.
Something is coming to mind, and I read it somewhere in the last week, but I could not tell you where I read it from. Like
Story of my life.
I cannot remember which book it was or where I was reading it from, but I think this is very situational or circumstantial. This isn't going to work for everybody, what I'm about to say, especially if you're struggling with image, like self-image. But I think, again, going back to that compassionate touch, I think sitting in front of a mirror and just noticing things about yourself, like how you carry weight on your shoulders, or you can see tension. But I think that imagery, again, sitting in front of a mirror, like it is so much easier, I think, for a lot of people to read body language. I think that's how we interpret a lot of our relationships, even as like a young child.
Yeah.
Emotionally, body language is the first thing we learn, like the first language that we learn.
Yes, absolutely. Through like attunement and being seen and hopefully.
And a lot of that too, like trauma related, like you can instantly pick up when, someone says something in a certain tone of voice or carries themselves a certain way, like your body will just naturally pick up on those things, even if you're not consciously aware of it. So I think too, just like sitting in front of a mirror and checking in and like seeing that on yourself. How do I feel in this present moment? I think too, that could be a really powerful way of witnessing, because a lot of healing is done in the presence of another person, right?
Yeah.
Therapy wise, there is a therapist who will witness your pain and they can't do anything. It doesn't mean that they're going to change it or take it away from you or solve it in any way. But the fact that there is a witness to your pain is what I think is so powerful in healing. And so being able to maybe set aside some time to check in for yourself, to be that witness. You can definitely witness yourself. And I think it could be, especially I think if you have a hard time grounding in the present moment, I think that could be a tool to use.
Yeah.
Visually speaking to those cues, it's easier, I think, for our emotional mind to interpret, understand than our logical mind, or to quiet the logical mind and shift into the emotional mind.
I think also too, you said this might be difficult if you struggle with self-image. And while you are right, this card is also showing us like we can't avoid the things that scare us forever. And that's such an important part of healing. I'm thinking too about like exposure therapy, like the whole idea with exposure therapy is that over time we expose ourselves little by little to what we fear the most. And then we are no longer fearful and we feel more at peace, like out moving around in the world, encountering some of the things that may have at one point we would have identified as like a trigger. So we can work ourselves up to looking at ourselves in the mirror. And I think we can start looking at ourselves in the mirror as hitting on one sense. It's hitting on sight. And yes, a great way to get into the present is engaging our senses. And the mirror would be engaging like the sensory of sight. But I'm thinking too, like, what other ways can we just be present with ourselves too, to work ourselves up to like sitting with ourselves in front of the mirror? Because we don't want to avoid, if the mirror right now is the lion, we don't want to avoid that forever, because at some point, like we can feel integrated with that.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know that it's everything we reject about ourselves we should eventually, I want to be careful with the word should.
I always say that too. And then the should comes out sometimes. I'm like, but does it fit here though?
Right. Yeah, I know.
Yes.
I think you're right in the sense that we can't avoid those things forever.
Yes.
The longer that we hold it at arm's length or refuse to look at it, the angrier it gets.
Yep.
Or the louder it gets, or the scarier it gets. So you're right. That is not something. If we are hoping to become a more whole person or an integrated person,
Yeah.
and not want our lives to be ruled by this thing forever or dictated or determined, or it's powerful. If we want to loosen our grip on that, we have to face it or come to terms with it in one way or another.
Yeah. Something I also like to call out, or I would like to call out about this card, is the fact that this is number 8 and the card is strength. I'm making the connection of 8 is also the infinity symbol, which is interesting. 8 is the number of mastery in tarot. It represents the moment when the work moves from external to internal. In strength, that shows up as mastering your instinct, emotion, and reactions, not by force, but by relationship. Infinity symbol floating above her head is the 8 turned sideways. This points to the endless loop of growth and contraction, the long-term nature of strength, the idea that courage is renewable, not finite.
I like that.
It reinforces that strength is something you return to over an ongoing cycle, not a single act. I really like that.
Cycle. There it is again.
Yep, and it's something that we return to over and over. So I think that's important for recognizing that in moments where maybe we just feel weak, it doesn't mean that we're not strong. It just means that we have to find our way back to strength. And that's what I was going to say, is that the journey of the major arcana starting with the Fool, it doesn't start with feeling strong. Strength comes at number 8. Strength comes a little bit into the journey. And I think that's so important because I think a lot of times when we start off on a journey, like a journey of change or an initiatory journey, we definitely are not feeling strong at the beginning of that. We're probably feeling pretty scared. We don't really know what's coming, but remembering that strength is something that we can return to because it is there, or we will learn along our journey how to access it.
Yes. I think that's a great segue into initiatory.
I was going to say that.
We're just on the same wavelength today.
I know.
I think.
I feel like I'm going to tell our listeners, I think it's because we started later in the morning. We started today at 10. And the past couple of times we recorded, we were like really trying to make this an early thing. Because I was like, let's just get it over with. So we can have our Sunday. But I'm like, I think that starting this a little bit later in the day is giving us, at least me, it's giving me a lot more like brain power and like not feeling so flustered or starving or feeling good.
Yeah.
Okay. The initiatory threshold. So let's begin to talk about what that is.
Yes.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Initiatory threshold, I think, is something like you said this morning, was a term really explored by Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
And I think the direction that I want to go with it is, so Joseph Campbell wrote a book called The Hero's Journey, which was all about the hero hearing a call for adventure. I think it's found in a lot of classic, like, movie plots. Everything.
Almost all movie plots, there is usually an identifiable hero's journey.
Mm-hmm. Lord of the Rings or Star Wars especially. Those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah. And the hero's journey's significance too is that Joseph Campbell really was the one to identify that like the hero's journey is a thematic thing and a relatable human experience for all of us.
And the thing about the hero's journey is I think it's very, so this is what I want to get into a little bit, but the hero's journey is it's an external journey for the most part. Like the hero has a moment where they are called to take up this adventure and they have to decide whether or not to answer that call. And when they do decide that they're going to embark on this journey is when they cross that initiatory threshold. And they go through all kinds of transformations on the way, right? They go through all sorts of trials, all sorts of challenges. they have moments when they fear themselves weak. And there are different kind of players. I think players is the wrong word, but there are different characters in this journey. There you go. That serve different roles or different purposes. There's a guide that's wise, and then there's the villain or the monsters that you have to fight to overcome. The difference between what I wanted to talk about as the hero's journey versus the heroine's journey, which I think is will resonate with a lot of our listeners, I think. I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The heroine's journey is very internal. Like, it's not necessarily an external adventure. It's let me pull this up here. The hero's journey is about disconnection, and then descent, and then healing and reintegration, which Brie and I read a book not too long ago called Descent and Rising.
It's like the 8th time it's been mentioned on this podcast because I feel like we mention it every time we record.
It's just such a good book.
It is good.
But anyways, that whole story is about really descent and the getting to the bottom and then the having to come back, or the rising after that. And in the story, Inanna is called to basically the underworld. She has to go and visit her sister in the underworld. This sister, the part of herself that has been rejected and buried and caged in a way. And Inanna has to make this descent through, I think it's 7.
I think it is 7
gates, right? 7 chakras, 7 gates. 7 gates of the underworld. And each threshold, each time she comes to a gate, she has to shed something of herself. She sheds her material items, like the crown that she's wearing and the jewels she's wearing and the clothes that she's wearing. And she sheds each one. It gets a little bit more like intangible. She has to shed her identity.
I haven't finished it fully.
Oh, I hope I'm not spoiling it.
You're not. Keep going. I should have finished it by now, so you can definitely keep going. I'm like 70% done.
Okay. But each time she has to come to terms with some of the identities that she's had her whole life, right? And so by the time she gets to gate 7, she's got nothing. She is at the very center of herself, like the core of her being. She's gotten rid of everything else. And she has to go to meet Inanna. And Inanna essentially kills, or Ereshkigal essentially kills Inanna. Ereshkigal is her other sister that lives in the underworld. And so Ereshkigal then hangs like Inanna up on a hook for several days. Inanna's handmaiden goes to the sky gods to plead for help because Inanna's not come back. And she knows something has happened. So she pleads to these sky gods, like, please help. And they say no. That she knew what she was getting into when she decided to go on this journey. They can't do anything for her. But I believe there is one of, I don't know if he's a sky god. There is a god of some kind that does help. And this god in particular is one he's described as having his fingers in the dirt. Like, he's the gardener. He knows what the deep soil feels like because he's made the journey himself. He knows that he can't do anything to save Inanna, right? This is her journey. She has to come out of it on her own. But he sends wisdom or guidance in the form of 2 creatures who can slip past all 7 gates. And by the time those 2 creatures get to Ereshkigal is in some kind of labor, and she's moaning and groaning and in pain, and these creatures just empathize with her. When she moans, they moan, and it's reflected back to her, which is something that's never been done for her before because she's been in the dark, in the underworld. She's rejected a lot of the time. So these creatures really, they empathize with her. They feel what she feels, and she sees that reflected back to her. And so when she's done laboring, she gifts these creatures a boon of some kind, or like a gift of some kind. And I can't remember what it is exactly that they ask for, but they do sprinkle, like, I think one of it's like wheat or grain of some kind, and the other's like tears maybe. but some kind of essence over Inanna's body that brings her back to life. And Ereshkigal only lets Inanna go as long as she promises to make some kind of a sacrifice to Ereshkigal. So Inanna goes back up to the upper world where she lives, only to find that her husband has usurped her and didn't care to come after her, didn't care what happened to her at all. Like, he just wanted her throne. So she sacrifices him to the underworld. And her husband's sister, so her sister-in-law, comes to plead for compassion for her brother. And so what ends up happening is they share, the two of them, brother and sister, share 6 months out of the year in the underworld with Ereshkigal. So I think that, again, speaks to the strength in compassion, because Inanna could have come back with, like, full of vengeance.
Yes.
And instead chose to hear her sister-in-law's plea for compassion.
Yep.
And integrated that request. I'm sure I am missing, like, huge parts of the story. So if this is at all appealing
very well
to you, please go read it. It's really good.
It makes me want to open this book because I'm trying to remember. Let's see. So there's a little just paragraph in the book that I like to read just about tarot stuff called Tarot for Change. And speaking back to the initiatory threshold, how it's usually like we're coming to terms or we're coming face to face with something that's like scary, right? But until we give that thing compassion, or until that thing receives compassion and understanding, what's the term I'm looking for? We're coming to terms with something scary, like in that story with Ereshkigal. Like, she receives compassion, and then in turn she's able to give Inanna like a second chance to go back up to upper world.
Feels like forgiveness?
Forgiveness? Yeah.
In a little
or
bit.
like Ereshkigal gives.
There's a transaction of some kind.
There's a transaction. But the transaction only is like beneficial once we give the thing that we scare the most, or that we fear the most, compassion and understanding. In this book, it says the forest-dwelling Arcadian god Pan, for example, is a gatekeeper who induces panic in those who wish to cross him. So initially, if we're like coming up against this god Pan, like we just by stumbling across him, we feel panic. And that would be very easy to be like, we're going to run. Yeah. Like same with the lion. We stumble across the lion, we're going to run from the lion. But it says, a swift death is brought to all who attempt to outrun him, but those who find a way to pay their respect and honor him as they enter his domain are blessed. With his powers, he then ensures that their crops yield abundant bounty and that their health is good. So it's like just another example of meeting the parts of ourselves that we're so fearful of with compassion and understanding has the effect of then being like what we needed, or being fruitful, or being beneficial. They're parts of us. They're meant to be, it's meant to be accepted.
There's a couple of quotes that come to mind when you say this. Two of which I found are from Rumi.
My girl? Like Golden Hunter? Like Demon Hunters?
No.
You mean like Rumi, like the poet?
Yeah, the poet.
Okay. My bad.
One is, the wound is the place where the light enters you, suggesting that our pain and vulnerability are not just sources of suffering, but also gateways for healing, growth, and a deeper understanding.
I'm feeling like Rumi from K-pop Demon Hunters is named after Rumi.
I feel like a lot of, as we were talking about, like embrace or like facing the lion and wanting to run, but not.
Yeah, the demons.
A lot of like stories came to mind.
Yeah.
Like, I am a very avid fantasy reader, and I feel like almost all the fantasy books have a moment in the story or in the plot where the main character is faced with something terrifying that they have to integrate within themselves for them to achieve what they're meant to achieve. Like, I can think of so many examples where I'm like,
oh yeah, totally.
That's the lion in the story, which I think is why it's so appealing, right? Why so many of these stories or these like fictional characters are so relatable or so interesting to us is because it's very psychic.
It's very resonant.
Yes.
I remember being in like 8th grade and one of my teachers teaching us how to write a fictional novel or something. We had to do like the whole, like, the hero's journey. Like, she taught about that for the purpose of our outline.
Yeah.
Because it just resonates.
Yeah. And there's a reason why. Whenever I find something that piques my interest that like I get curious about, I'm like, I wonder why that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's obviously important.
Right.
To my psyche. Otherwise it wouldn't be
Exactly
catching my attention. Then the other quote from Rumi that I have here is that these pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them. Which I think, again, is a nod back to the like sacred dialogue we can have with ourselves, if you will. Like, it is a conversation.
Yeah.
That
it's
we
meant
have
to
to
be
have
a
with
conversation.
ourselves. Which I think is why I'm like so into journaling at the moment. 'Cause
Yeah.
like, I'm ready to have this conversation now. Again, it's not a conversation that happens all the time. Maybe unless you have the time, which
Yeah.
I don't always have the time
Sure.
to be in conversation with myself. But
Yep. It's like creating intentional time to do that.
yeah.
I think my time that I dedicate to doing that is just going to therapy right now.
Looks different, right?
It looks different for everyone. Okay. Is there anything else we want to say about the strength card, or do we feel like we covered it?
I think one thing I want to leave this episode with is I know it comes up a lot, or at least the side of media that I'm on, like the reparenting yourself, especially as a parent, as a young parent myself. This is a conversation that my husband and I have all the time about reparenting ourselves or reparenting while parenting.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Just so hard.
It is so hard.
But one thing I have here is it's important to learn how to hold space for all of the difficult emotions without abandoning or attacking the self. It's just hard to do.
It is hard to do. I always say to my clients, like, I know this is so hard. Like, why? It's so interesting that it's just so second nature for us to come at ourselves in such harsh ways. And I don't know. I don't really understand that. I don't know why that is. I don't know why somebody who's so loving and welcoming and kind to others, we have such an incredible time turning that inward. But I think the fact that we do have that ability to turn that outward means that we have the ability to turn it inward. We just have to going back to the beginning here, like we have to see ourselves as the child that exists within us. Like there's so many times where when I'm in therapy, I like view clients as like the little child sitting on my couch. And I think sometimes we have to also see that in ourselves to be able to make that shift into talking to ourselves more compassionately or with more kindness or whatever it may be.
Which is, again, I think being in the present is so hard because it's so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable.
Yep.
But the more that you can do it and do it with a witness of some kind, whether that's yourself in that role as witness or with someone else that you feel safe with. But the more that you can create space for some of these things, it might get hard before it gets better.
Always.
But you won't feel like your unconscious is ruling. Your waking ruled.
I'm going to end with this little quote that just says, strength equals compassion plus courage plus slow growth plus self-trust. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today.
If you have any thoughts, questions, feedback, anything you want to share with us, there is a Google form linked in our Instagram bio. You can leave a message for us there, send us a message on Instagram, however you like to share that with us. But thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us in today's conversation. We hope this space offered you a spark of meaning, a reminder of your own strength, or simply the comfort of knowing you're not alone in the messy middle of becoming.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to share it with a friend, subscribe, or leave us a review. It helps this little community grow.
You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Heart on the Table Pod, where we share more reflections, tarot pulls, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of the podcast.
Until next time, may you keep noticing the magic woven into your everyday life.
Please remember, while we are both licensed clinicians, this podcast is not therapy and does not create a therapeutic relationship. The conversations here are for educational and reflective purposes only. If you are seeking mental health support, we encourage you to connect with a licensed provider in your area. Thanks for listening.